On today's show, reflecting on Kevin Durant's debut with the Houston Rockets against the Thunder, what worked out offensively and what didn't work offensively for this team, plus Tari Eason's reported contract extension offer and more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Fridays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. And joining us now is your weekly co-host, Sports Radio 610's Brandon Scott, who can track down on Instagram at @BScott from Hiram Clark. And Brandon, we are one game into this season, and it wasn't the result that we wanted from the Houston Rockets in the opening night slate against the OKC Thunder, but still a lot to kind of reflect on and unpack from this game. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the post-game quotes that Kevin Durant had. One very interesting quote in particular. And we'll get to that in just a second. But I just want your kind of your overall impression, but both from, Katie's official debut as a member of the Rockets and just kind of, your thoughts on the team and how they played against OKC in that first game.
Yeah, I came away from the game really encouraged, right? Like it's one of those where like you can lose a game and still feel like you came away with a win because of your overall takeaway of the team. And there are some things that they got to figure out and correct to be sure, right? Obviously they lost the game, but just in terms of their makeup and identity and just like of course, obviously, the point guard conversation is one that's going to be relevant probably for the entire season until it's not, right? Until we get a reason for why it's not. But like just overall, I came away feeling really good about where the team's at. The Kevin Durant thing, man, like it's amazing how much like one player can settle things for a team. And I mean, we can get into Kevin Durant, but like I wanted him to be more aggressive at the end of the game, and I thought that was kind of the above all of some of the other criticisms that were valid, to be sure. I thought that was the one that was most frustrating to watch. But when you think about the game that Alperen Sengun had, right, like he was the star of the game. He was the best, but on a night where you had, an MVP, two MVPs and a lot of really good players on the floor, Alperen Sengun was the best player on the floor. And I thought a big reason for that, Jackson, was like the presence of Kevin Durant. And Durant, we'll talk about some of his post-game comments, but one of his post-game comments that I do want to point out here off the top was just, this is a basketball thing that I think all of us have pointed out, but you could see it out there against the Thunder, was just the space that Sengun's able to operate with now that Kevin Durant is on the team and everybody else around him is a shooter. And it just expands what Alperen Sengun's able to be, right? Like his game, and we talked about this, how guys around Kevin Durant, their game is going to elevate because of him. This is a tangible example of how and why that is. I thought Kevin Durant's presence was a big reason why we saw the night that we did from Alperen Sengun. And so that stood out to me on top of some of the things that we can pick apart and criticize from Kevin Durant's performance.
No, absolutely. And that's a great point is, having another co-star out there, having a guy like Katie that it was the focal point for the Thunder defense to try and slow down and stop, right? They put their best defender on him with Lou Dort, and they really did make it an emphasis to make life difficult for KD, and he still walked away with a super uber efficient 23 points on 9 of 16 shooting. I agree with your sentiment about the aggressiveness from KD in this one in particular, and that's something we're going to talk about here in just a moment and kind of expand upon too, because we're also going to take a look at kind of the Rockets like offensive breakdown sort of from game one. I have access to Synergy now. I don't know how to use it fully yet, but we're going to have some fun with it this season. And so I want to run through some of the numbers and some of the, certain, actions and sets that the Rockets ran and see what worked, what didn't work, and what we, will hopefully see more of as this team builds chemistry, gets, more cohesion with one another, that kind of thing. But for KD, I want two things stand out post game that he said. One, he was asked about, some of the late game issues, from the end of regulation, the two overtime periods. And he owned up to the fact that, the mistakes of his own, right? The missed free throw at the end of regulation that would have pushed it to a 3-point game instead of it just being, a 1-possession game or a 2-point game, that allowed SGA to basically tie things up and force OT. And he also highlighted, right, the foul on SGA at the end, right? I mean, it was Kevin had a fantastic game defensively. He played out of his mind on the defensive side of the ball for most of the game and just had one, very crucial mistake there at the end that gave OKC a chance to, to win the game, unfortunately. But the other post-game quote that he had, because he owned up to that, and he said, I feel like I cost us the game, right, with those two mistakes in particular. But the other post-game quote that he had, and this is the one that I think is very interesting, and I wonder what this means for the dynamic of this Rockets team. Kevin highlighted that, when asked about the shot selection and kind of the organization, especially, at the end of the game, crunch time, that kind of thing, Kevin basically said, the team closes the game out. We close games out as a team. I'm not expected to make every big shot in every close game. And I think that's very antithetical to the expectation that Rockets fans had upon acquiring Kevin Durant. At least even my own expectations for what Kevin Durant would mean to this team. It would, I kind of envision, hey, it means you have a go-to closer. You have a guy that should be able to take over in those moments at the end of games. And, there have been a lot of, fans who have, been a little, pushing back a little bit, on the result of this first game and basically saying that, the Rockets need to do a better job of getting the ball to Kevin Durant. And I can agree to a certain, I agree to an extent, but I also think there's a level of Kevin Durant being the star needs to command the ball, right? Needs to command those moments at the end of games. B. Scott, how do you feel about, Kevin saying that he's not expected or, to make every big shot? And just kind of how do you, react to that with, how he played at the end of this game against OKC in particular?
Yeah. So not to get too actually, and, but he is technically correct. He is not expected to make every big shot at the end of every game. However, kinda, you know what I mean, KD? If I were to respond to him, if I had been there for that, I would say, hey, get sort of though, not really, but kind of though, and so that's the hang up. That's that's what you're seeing is Kevin Durant being a consummate pro team guy. And we understand this about Kevin Durant, right? He is not, I don't want to say that he's not an alpha, because he certainly is an alpha in terms of, talent and, accomplishment and his status among the all-time greats and all of that, what we understand about Kevin Durant. But just in terms of his personality, we understand that he wants to be one of the guys. That is just a part of his personality, who he is and who he's going to be. But there is going to be some balance of, hey, you want to be one of the guys, but at the same time, you are the guy. When we don't have an answer or when we need to make it as simple as possible, and we saw this in the game. There were actual examples of this in the game where it's oh man, look how easy that was. Kevin just gave the ball to Kevin Durant. And then when they didn't do that, when you see some odd Reed Shepherd moments and you think, oh, well, you know what? Seemed like it'd have been just a good idea to just get a ball to Kevin Durant there. I can remember a moment in the game where I said, I was watching the game and I said to my girlfriend, where is Kevin Durant? Because there was one point where both things were happening. They weren't doing a good enough job of getting him the ball, and he wasn't doing a good enough job of commanding the ball and saying, hey, things are, I can even remember on the broadcast, it was either Reggie Miller or Jamal Crawford who said, hey, they need to get the ball to Kevin Durant here now because Oklahoma City's starting to make a run. I want to say that might have been in the third quarter. But that part of it did stand out. And look, I think that Kevin Durant is being a team guy here, but there's going to have to be some balance of team guy and understanding that you are sort of the fixer here when things are going left.
A big part of it too is just going to be, again, as this team builds some chemistry throughout the season, they start understanding, hey, this is where these guys like this, this is where Kevin likes getting the ball. This is how they're going to have to maybe adjust to not having a traditional floor general out there. This is definitely a game where you look back and you're like, man, Fred VanVleet was sorely missed in this game to be able to kind of, steady the troops and rally guys and, understanding, hey, this is a possession where we need a bucket or we need a good shot. Let's maybe get the ball to our future first ballot Hall of Famer, right? In KD. So there's, it's a two-way street there. The guys need to do a better job of getting the ball to KD. KD needs to do a better job of really, forcing the issue as the team's star player. Even on a night where Alperen Sengun is balling out and has, a mismatch advantage against Alex Caruso, you're Kevin Durant, you are a mismatch advantage against everybody, right? So coming up, we're going to dive into some of the offensive numbers for both Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun, the Rockets as a team against the OKC Thunder in game one, as well as we'll get into the reported contract that was offered to Tari Eason that he declined. We're going to get to all of that here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. Look, if you're still overpaying for wireless, it's time to say yes to saying no. At Mint Mobile, their favorite word is no. No contracts, no monthly bills, no overages, no hidden fees, no BS. You can say yes to making the switch and getting premium wireless for just $15 a month. Mint makes it so simple. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can even bring your own phone and keep your same number and contacts. You're getting the exact same quality service that you had before, but for a fraction of the price. So if you're ready to say yes to saying no, make the switch at mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 per month. Limited time new customers offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rougiette. Let's be real. Making excuses doesn't solve anything. If you've heard them all before, it's just stress, I'm tired, or it happens to everyone sometimes. But when it comes to performance, sometimes your body just needs a little extra support. And that's where Rougiette comes in. Rougiette.com offers fast-acting doctor-prescribed treatments for ED designed to help you stop making excuses and start making moves. Rougiette makes it so easy to get started. You just connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online. No awkward waiting rooms, no in-person appointments. If prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly to your doorstep. The process is fast, simple, and private, and it's all handled by real doctors. Visit Rougiette.com. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNBA to get 15% off your first order. That's Rougiette.com/LockedOnNBA. And don't forget to use our code LockedOnNBA so that we know, so that they know that we sent you. Rougiette, stop making excuses and start making moves. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Brandon, let's dive into some of, we know what we saw in the game with our eyes, and I'm a big eye test guy. I generally believe I know what I saw, kind of what took place in the game. But let's see what the advanced data says about what the Rockets actually managed to do offensively against this, historic Thunder defense. And surprisingly, like, the offense didn't, as clunky as it did feel at times with the turnovers and the lack of a true lead guard to kind of, settle things out at times, it did feel like the Rockets found some success in certain areas of the floor. And there were two in particular that the Rockets really excelled in this game. And that would be their isolation opportunities. So when they actually got to play in isolation, whether it was Sengun or KD or even Amin Thompson a little bit, those guys all had a good amount of success operating in isolation. And then their post-up opportunities, which a lot of those came from Alperen Sengun, but also, a couple opportunities from KD, one from Jabari. And so the Rockets actually, their best offense was just playing in isolation in this game. They scored 23 points off isolation plays, 1.3 points per possession in isolation, with Alperen Sengun and KD leading the way there. Alperen Sengun had 9 points of his 39 scored in ISO, 1.8 points per possession. KD just 4 possessions, but 7 total points scored in isolation, 1.75 points per possession. And then Amin Thompson clocking in third there he had 3 isolation possessions and scored 1.33 points per possession. And that's solid, like across the board. Like the fact that the Rockets' big 3, when given the opportunity to attack, to basically just hand them the rock and say, hey, go to work, that they were able to be as productive as they were. I think bodes well for the offense that we're likely going to see out of this team for for most of the season, which is at times just going to be like, let Sengun cook, let KD cook, let Amin get downhill and cook. Like that's going to be some of the offense that we see for most of the season, I feel like.
Yeah, and it was noteworthy that Amin Thompson started the game as aggressive as he was, right? And I think they even talked about that on the broadcast. Like, man, on a night where Kevin Durant is making his debut with the Rockets and doing it in Oklahoma City, his old stomping grounds. Here's Amin Thompson, right? It is being as aggressive as maybe we've ever seen him. And you could expect that given just the new makeup of the team and him kind of getting the reins, or them giving him the reins and everything. So that part stood out. I would go back to the starting lineup for one, and just the matchup issue that creates, like with Steven Adams out there. Now there's nobody to really guard Sengun, right? Because you're either asking Chet Holmgren, or in the case when Caruso's out there, right? So it was either Caruso, it was mostly Caruso, but the way the starting lineup is constructed, there's nobody now to guard Alperen Sengun. There's a matchup issue. Chet can't do it; he just can't. And of course, Hartenstein now has to contend with Steven Adams, who is just good enough offensively to where you have to actually guard him, right? So so to me, that everything really started there with them sort of creating a little bit of a matchup problem with the double big. And then, yeah, you mentioned the isolation. You saw Amin Thompson early. I mentioned earlier the space that's created for Alperen Sengun to work, and Kevin Durant talked about this after the game too. Like when he's at the top of the key now, where he really likes the ball, and obviously, him in the post and in the high post is, kind of a proven deal, but he really likes the ball up there at the top of the key, and he's able to operate now because there's actual space to work with. And so that's what I was getting at earlier about Kevin Durant's presence. Like, even with the mistakes or the lack of aggression or whatever, I was like, man, it sure is good to have that guy out there, man. Because for one, you can always give him the ball. And for two, Alperen Sengun's a better basketball player now, just by that guy's presence. Right. So that's what stood out to me about their offense was the aggression of Amin Thompson early, and which something I think we can expect to be a theme. He's gonna shoot the ball, right? He didn't shoot. He shot a few too many threes, more threes than I would like. But I like the fact that he was aggressive and confident and willing to shoot them. And the presence of Kevin Durant obviously sort of speaks for itself with having him, but also what it does for everybody else.
There was one other area that did stand out that looked really solid and something that hopefully they lean further into. And this is going to be about establishing chemistry and getting guys on the same page so that guys know when to cut, when to move. But the Rockets actually scored 15 points off cuts in this game, 1.66 points per possession. It only came in as they only had 9 total possessions that qualified as cuts in this game, only 6.7% of their total offensive possessions. But it did feel like whenever the Rockets got like a good like duck in and seal, like there was one near the, at one point where Jabari got a really good duck in and seal on SGA, like directly under the rim, and Alp just threw him the pass and he just turned around and like dropped the ball in the hoop because SGA had no ability to contest like a 6'11", 7-foot dude who got a good seal right under the rim. So moments like that, right? And we know that the Rockets have a lot of great off-ball players who can move well without the basketball. An area that they struggled in was, when their pick and roll ball handler actually tried to do literally anything, it was awful. So they only scored 0.64 points per possession on pick and roll ball handler sets, which, there's a mess of like, who's the actual go-to pick and roll ball handler, right? We saw some struggles from Reed. We saw some struggles from other guys, and credit to the OKC Thunder defense who, they jump out at you. And if you're loose with the basketball, like they're going to dive, they're going to claw and scratch and foul and, grab and hold. And it was a little messy there, but the one that really, and we did talk about this a little bit in the recap, that we were a little astonished that we didn't see more of this, was the lack of actions between Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun in particular in like that little 2-man game. And the Rockets actually only ran, or Alperen Sengun only ran one pick and roll play as the roll man in the entire game. And it was that one play where he ran it with KD at the top of the key, and they gave too much attention to KD. He hit the little pocket pass to Sengun on the roll. He gets fouled, goes to the free throw line. I believe he knocked both down, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it was just one or two, but that was the only like official like roll man play that Alperen Sengun had all night. And that's where, again, you sorely miss Fred VanVleet, a guy who got so adept at the 2-man game with Alperen Sengun, feeding him those little pocket passes, getting him on the short roll so that he can operate out of the middle of the floor. But that's also something that it feels like the Rockets are going to need to explore more of between Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun, because the gravity of those two guys is so immense that it should lead to some really advantageous offensive opportunities. They just need to do more of it. And I'm just really shocked that we didn't see more of it in game one.
Yeah, no, that baffles me, that because it seems like an obvious play and an obvious like part of something that should be a part of their offense and what they do. And so this is going to be something where, like, I don't know if anybody, maybe this hasn't come up yet, but this would be worth asking about, and there's maybe a way to present it, but like asking both Sengun and Durant how comfortable they are running pick and roll together. And is it something that they're still figuring out? Like I keep going back to media day when Kevin Durant mentioned, hey, that might take, hey, we're going to learn to play together, and that might take time. I don't know how much time, and obviously can't take too much time, but it might take time. Obviously, we just had one game. So I wonder if that's just something that right now they're not extremely comfortable with, and maybe they want to practice it more. And it's not like you get a lot of practice time during the season, but maybe it's just something that is just not there yet. But I cannot imagine, Jackson, that we're going to go a long stretch here where we're just going to see one pick and roll between Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun in a game, right? Like, or per game, like that. There's going to have to be, I'm talking like there should be 5, 6, 7, 8 of those in a game, and I might be even undershooting it there. Like that there should be healthy doses of that as part of their offense.
Absolutely. And hopefully that's something that we see. And, the offense is going to be a work in progress, right? It's really tough when you lose your lead guard like Fred VanVleet, and then you're trying to acclimate, Thompson, Reed Shepherd, get them up to speed. You're also integrating a star like Kevin Durant. You're trying to let 2 star level players in Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun learn how to play off of one another. So the fact that it looked as good as it did in game one, despite some of the clunkiness, despite some of the, the bumps and bruises here and there, there's a lot to be excited about. And again, there's no need to doom and gloom after one game. I know that we ride the emotions pretty high, highs and lows here at the show. But that's also why we have, multiple episodes throughout the week. So we can take a bit of a step back and have a bit more of a measured approach to what we saw in the aftermath of some of these games. But coming up, we're going to get into the reported contract that was offered to Tari Eason, and yet still, there was no ability to come to terms on a deal there, and what that means for his future and what we think about the reported contract that got offered to Tari. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode was brought to you by Skims. Look, when I found out Skims was making underwear for men, I'll admit I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends, from family, so I had to give it a try. And let me tell you, they absolutely live up to the hype. Having issues with underwear is no fun, right? Whether maybe they fall apart over time, or the elasticity wears out in the waistband, whatever it is, right? Whether it's fit, comfort, or just finding the right style for you, Skims can change all of it. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I checked out the Skims 5-inch boxer brief, and let me tell you, it absolutely it's incredible. It's the best pair of boxers that I've ever owned. I made the full switch. I bought a whole set of them, and I don't wear anything else now. I'm hooked. They're perfect for an active lifestyle. They move with you. They never lose their shape, and they stay in place all day long. So whether you're working out or just out and about running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear that I've ever owned. It's awesome. You can check them out. Go shop Skims Men's at skims.com. Let them know that we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's shift gears here and revisit this, discussion, with Tari Eason, kind of the aftermath. Very unfortunate that the Rockets and Tari were not able to come to terms on a rookie scale extension. Tari's been such a big part of this team. He's a fan favorite. His impact on the court, is oftentimes very, very good. It wasn't the best in this game against OKC. And maybe you call that, maybe there was a little bit of like some emotions for Tari, right? Like we were literally less than 24 hours removed from that contract deadline and probably some pretty, intense negotiations and trying to, get both sides to come to terms on a deal that they both felt good about. And unfortunately, they weren't able to get it done. So that there's, probably a human element at play, maybe a little bit as to, some of Tari's struggles in that first game. But reportedly from Brian Windhorst of ESPN put out there that the Rockets offered Tari Eason a contract of over $100 million. Now, I would imagine that a contract of that value, we'll call it, the reporting says over $100 million. It also includes that it was not guaranteed money either. And I will say that we know that in the past, Rafael Stone has gotten really clever and creative with some of these deals. In particular, we can go back to the structure of the Kevin Porter Jr. contract in particular, because at the time, right, KPJ was, kind of a rehabilitation project for the Rockets, and he'd had a bit of a checkered past. And so that contract, the way that it was structured, it was reported originally as a 4-year, $80 million contract. But we know, and I don't remember the specifics off the top of my head. I've tried to block out as much of that part of Rockets history from my brain as possible. But the way the contract was structured, there were basically like fail safes all throughout the contract, and there were you could cut ties at almost any point every year. They were baked in like more or less not official team options, but just non-guaranteed dates or dates where you'd have to pick up the next year of the option. So a ton of non-guaranteed money in that contract, and my best guess here, Brandon, is that even though on paper the Rockets were trying to offer Tari we'll call it a quote unquote $100 million contract or somewhere thereabouts, there was probably a lot of things baked into it as to, hey, you must play like X number of games, or hey, there's years that are non-guaranteed in here as kind of maybe some potential outs in case some of the injury stuff weighed in or other potential factors. And at that point, maybe it was only guaranteed up to like maybe $60 million or something. And the other $40 million would have been based on, incentives or other potential things down the line. And it's tough because on paper, it sounds like a good deal, but we won't ever know the true specifics behind it. How do you feel about Tari and the Rockets not really able to see eye to eye and come to terms on a deal here?
Yeah, I hate it because Tari Eason is the kind of player that I feel like every basketball team wants. Like every team wants a Tari Eason. The season debut notwithstanding, every basketball team wants a player like Tari Eason on their team, right? And I would include myself. I'm glad to have Tari Eason on the team that I follow and care about. But when you think about it, man, and I would also say that from Tari Eason's side, that when you play well enough to earn any kind of contract extension, that is winning. That is, that when you get the next everybody is playing for the next contract, right? You're always playing for your next contract, right? So just the fact that he was, offered a contract extension of any kind is, a credit to him, and just something that I would imagine he's, looking forward to signing this new deal. And then, you kind of let the bottom out there and you look up and you're like, oh, but the fine print, there's funny money here, and it's not actually the contract that you say it is or that I feel like I deserve. And so it's unfortunate, but then you think about like how you could understand that, right? Where Eason plays all the games his first year, but only plays like, what was it, 20 something games the second year because of the weird bone situation. And then last year, did he play like 50 in the 50s somewhere, maybe? So you get it why the team would want to use that as a negotiation tactic.
Hedge their bets a little bit,
yeah, to hedge their bet on the one end, but then also feel like, hey, based off of the information that we have, this is what you earned. You earned a contract, but with the caveat, right? Because you didn't stay healthy for 2 of the 3 seasons that we're talking about. And then of course from Tari's standpoint, I hate it because you play for the second contract. When I first saw this news, I'm like, man, why wouldn't he sign that deal? And then the more I thought about it, I even thought about the KPJ thing that you mentioned, and just the idea that a team is incentivized to, hedge their bet in this way, right? Or you could look at it as protecting their investment. However you want to look at it, it does make sense why they might, if you want to call it low ball or however you want to characterize it, why they might be in different spaces. Why Tari thinks he should get one thing and why the team thinks he should get another. Unlike some of the other contract extensions we saw, like let's say Jabari Smith Jr.
Yeah, and I think that too, when you look around the landscape, there was like the Toumani Camara contract with the Blazers, and Toumani Camara is already an All-NBA caliber defender, and he got 4 years. I want to say it was like $82 million, which was like a pretty close analog for what you would maybe think Tari Eason could get. You could also factor in maybe there's a bit of like a loser tax that the Blazers have to pay to be able to retain a player like that. As far as potential contract extension there. I think at the end of the day, the Tari situation, it's unfortunate because it's going to be a storyline this season. It'll be something that we're going to have to check in routinely and, monitor and be like, how's Tari playing? Is he disgruntled? Are the Rockets looking at possibly trading him? Are they going to start, floating his name on the trade market and see what they could potentially get for him? Ultimately, my desired outcome personally for this whole Tari Eason situation is like, I don't begrudge him for wanting to bet on himself or for wanting to see if he can earn more than whatever, that contract was, with the non-guaranteed money and stuff baked into it, kind of under the surface, under the hood of it. So I don't begrudge him for wanting to bet on himself and see what he could potentially get this upcoming offseason. And the Rockets do still have the vehicle to retain him, even if he does get offered a contract, maybe, more than what the Rockets were expecting to have to pay to keep him around if they were able to come to terms on a deal this summer. They can retain him. He's a restricted free agent. And at the end of the day, I mean, if he balls out and, looks like he's taking another step forward in his career, then you probably feel pretty good about matching a contract offer down the line, right? Like that's kind of the beauty of restricted free agency is, it's unfortunate because you'd like to be able to keep that talent and retain it, on a bit of a more team-friendly contract. That's certainly Rafael Stone's MO and has been for a while now with these players. But at the same time, kind of similar to the Jalen Green situation, right? Like I remember, trying to, argue the fact that the Rockets would have been better off just letting Jalen Green go to restricted free agency and then figuring it out there, because then you give him like one more year, like, hey, prove it. Can you like really do this for a whole season and be that guy that this team needs you to be? And then if he does become that guy, then cool. You give him like whatever his max contract is, or if another team walks along and offers him a max, you feel pretty good about maxing it because you have a whole year's worth of data to say, hey, we're confident in this guy being the guy. It's okay now, as opposed to, I don't know. Like I think that ultimately, it's not the end of the world, and they have next summer to kind of basically they just kick the can down the road basically at this point.
Yeah. I mean, that's the key part. I think it is surprising because it felt like, it comes on the heels of Kevin Durant taking less, right? Mm-hmm. Or quote unquote taking less. And so you feel like it kind of all falls into place for, okay, now it's time to re-up Tari Eason, and then so for it to not work out in that way was a little bit surprising, but perhaps should not have been. Kicking the can down the road actually does make sense, really, for both parties when you think about it. Even though, look, shout out to Tari for betting on himself, because I probably would have signed the deal. Like, let's assume that it was $60 million guaranteed instead of the $100 million. I don't know. Like I would
bear in mind too, it potentially like 60 million guaranteed with a chance to make up to 100 million. Like it's not just, or maybe it was 80 million guaranteed across like 5 years or something. Like that's a lot of guaranteed money to turn down, and that takes some serious cojones.
Because that's the other bet on yourself, right? Like hey, I'll sign this deal that has all of this money attached to it, but so much of it is guaranteed. I'm going to take this bird in hand and be glad with it, but I'm going to actually go out there and do the things that they're saying that I might not do, or all of these clauses in here. I'm going to meet every single one of them, except the ones that maybe they try to screw me out of. But as long as I'm healthy, I'm meeting every benchmark and I'm getting every dollar. So like that could have been a different version of betting on yourself, but we'll see how it plays out, man. Again, I want to reiterate, Tari Eason is the type of player that every basketball team should want to have on it.
We definitely want your thoughts on the Rockets offense in game 1 against the Thunder, the dynamics with Kevin Durant at play, everything we discussed there, as well as the new reporting here on Tari's contract. Give us your thoughts on everything in the YouTube comments. Brandon, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at, man.
At B Scott from Hiram Clark on Instagram and at Brandon K. Scott on Twitter. You can also check out the B Block podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and I'm at SportsRadio 610 as well.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.